welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of many things, but one thing in particular that we are here to discuss today, a gorgeous book that is now available in a full cast audiobook production. It is so much fun to listen to, so delightful, and I am so excited for this conversation. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hi, thanks, Jen. It's delightful to be here. My name's Ruby Peru. My book is called Bits of String Too Small to Save. It's a book that is actually illustrated in its original paperback and hardback format, but I've come out with an audiobook, and that's what we're here to talk about today. And it's a full cast dramatized audiobook, so it's like a movie. And that's the book in question today, although I'm also the author of a detective novel called Untamed Justice and a memoir called Business Cards and Shoe Leather, and lots of other books that I've ghostwritten for clients.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing Bits of String Too Small to Save with me. It has been my companion on my commutes for quite a while now because my commute's not very long. So I've been listening to it in small
And it's
little
a
15,
long book.
20-minute chips. And it has been like a really nice, companion throughout my that bookends my day. Before we talk about the audiobook version, I'd love to talk about the project in general. What was its inception point? Was it a particular character or a line of dialogue or a mood that you were hoping for? What was like the seed from which it grew?
The seed from which it grew was me trying not to lose my creativity. It started because I used to teach kindergarten, and it was so much fun. And I would have the kids in a circle, and I would just tell them a story every day, make up something, and all the kids would be in the story. Whatever they were wearing that day would be in the story, and they were just absolutely transfixed by these stories. And it was really fun, but it didn't pay anything. And so I eventually had to leave that job for a job writing for a magazine, which was living in a cubicle every day, just grinding away. And I said, I'm not going to let this destroy me psychologically, because I really was being my best self with the kids. But this job was right across the street from the public library in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I lived for a long time. And so after work, it was like my promise to myself that every day after work, I would go straight to the library and I would write for an hour. And I would keep my storytelling spark alive. And the rule was I had to enjoy myself. There was no grinding away at this. This was after a day of grinding away. So it was, you're going to enjoy yourself. You're going to tell a story to a non-specific audience, which was something that I was sort of, because I had this rule that I had to write for an hour, and it was kind of like free writing, like just go, 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 don't stop. And you had to be enjoying yourself. I wasn't exactly sure when it started who the audience was. At first, the audience was my kids, because that was the audience I was used to. But gradually, as I was living my adult life, things from my adult life started coming into the story. And I started going, oh, now I really don't know who the audience is. And that is a little bit reflected in the book. But the book is essentially, people ask me, who'd you write it for? And the answer is me. I wrote it for me. I like a bit of a children's story. I like a bit of an adult theme, not like adult like that, but like grown-up themes, and the way a really skilled children's book author can sneak grown-up themes into a children's book to where it's enjoyable for the adult and the child. Like, say, if an adult is reading it to a child, it's sort of like Tolkien was brilliant at that. Like The Hobbit is a perfect example of a book that was meant to be read aloud, and it was meant to have all these a lot of dialogue, a lot of characters, a lot of voices. If you enjoy reading aloud, that's a perfect book. And that's sort of what this book was meant to be.
I love a lot about that. First off, I love the role of a public library in your story and the creation of this project.
Oh, right? I
Love
know.
here. And I love the nod to Tolkien and sort of his use of orality, in storytelling. Before I was a librarian, I was a medieval historian in grad school. And so, like Tolkien. And I think that's something that is very easy for modern audiences to forget is that so many of these stories were meant to be orally told and passed down and stuff like that. And that does sort of inflect your writing process. So I'd love to hear that. Could you talk a little bit about your world building? I loved the world in which we start and the world in which we end up. I loved the sort of mashup of like a very contemporary feeling dystopian police state with the sort of fairy tale, magical realism of Bumble Green. Could you talk a little bit about crafting the settings for your story?
Essentially, No Oaks, the original world, is kind of like a dystopian version of Santa Fe because it's a desert town. There's no water, right? A lot of people, Santa Fe is kind of like a destination town. So a lot of people think it's like a fabulous paradise. But if you live there, you know better. And there's no water. A lot of people actually have fake grass, like people that are just like, oh, I want grass. They have, what do you call that? Plastic fake grass in front of their house. And it's surreal. Like to me, it's surreal when I see that. And so I was like, okay, that's going in the book. Everything I see, everything that I would see during the time I was writing this, if it bothered me or if it was weird, I'd be like, that's going in the book. I'd meet somebody who annoyed me. You're going in the book, you know. And so yeah, it was kind of like where I lived taken to a dystopian extreme. And then when they go through the portal to Bubble Green, and there is a very obvious reference to kind of an Alice in Wonderlandy style going through a portal thing. That's not the only book that's ever involved going through a portal to another world, but I don't mind that it's a very obvious reference. It's a great uh, paradigm for a book. We all live in different worlds in our minds and in the world. And what better than just a portal to get you from one to the other? Skip all the in between stuff. So, yeah. And so Bumble Green was created basically through my resolution to be constantly having fun. So immediately there were talking animals. Okay. Where would I like to be? In a forest. Okay, it's a forest. What do I want the character to be doing? Well, first of all, there's trees, you can climb the trees. I'm just looking, and I had been talking to my kids about rainforests. And so at first I thought, should this be educational about rainforests? And then I ended up taking all the educational stuff out because it was like, no, I just want it to be fun. And so, but that's what a lot of the exploration was because originally I wanted to be educational about rainforest. So she goes up she climbs a tree, and then she's in the canopy. And so it talks about the understory, and it talks about the canopy and all the different aspects of the rainforest. And then it just gets into this crazy duchess lives in this magical mansion, and it's just off the rails. And the thing was, I was really just making it up as I went along. So to say that I was motivated by some deep-seated drive to create a certain story would be a lie. I wasn't. But as I went along, every wacky thing, like I was saying, every wacky thing that I encountered in my life, I would throw it in there because it was fun and it was sort of therapeutic for me. I still do this. Anything in my life that I have to deal with, fictionalize it, put it into a different world, give it a totally different face, and then mock it. And that's how I sort of did therapy on myself while I was doing this book. But also, the thing is, the characters are me. When people go, oh, sometimes people read the book and they go, oh, is Elizabeth Ann supposed to be you? And I go, oh my God, all the characters are me. The Duchess, who is so privileged, she doesn't even know how to go down to the kitchen and make herself a sandwich. That bitch is me. Her personal chef, who is just basically kind of trashy lady who just makes really bad decisions for her life and doesn't know how to do anything. She is also me. Elizabeth Ann, who was too young and innocent to understand anything, she is also me. It's like, if you really look into your own self, you are all of those people. And to me, bringing out each of those characters of myself and embodying them and giving them a person um, is fun. It's fun and it's sort of weirdly therapeutic in a way it's hard to describe.
Wow, that's fascinating. It does sound therapeutic. Yeah, and the additional sort of benefit of not only, extending these little bits of yourself into these different characters, but then also watching them interact and their conflicts or their collaborations and all those things is a really interesting process, I imagine. You mentioned Elizabeth Ann, and I'd love to talk more about her, 5 syllables worth of girl, as you say in the book. Could you talk about crafting her and her grandmother? Because I really love both those characters so deeply, and I really love their dynamic too.
Okay. Elizabeth Ann was based on one of the little girls that was one of my students in kindergarten. I don't know how it was based on her. Just she was a very imaginative kid, and I just kind of started with her as the inspiration. Grandma was based on a combination between my boyfriend at the time, who was really into cars, and my landlady at the time, who was just the nicest person imaginable. And I said, I'm going to take these and make them the same person. And this was brilliant because while she is such a she's a nice person, but she's also very adventurous with the real life person. She actually joined the Peace Corps at age 75 and went to Mongolia. She's a super interesting, daring person. And if she knew anything about cars, she would be into cars. So it was really a good combination of people. And between the two of them, I always knew what Grandma would say and do because it would always be what one of those two characters would do. Um, so that's kind of how that's how Grandma came about.
That's so cool. Yeah, they're really both wonderful, and there are so many fantastic characters in this. And this is a good question, perhaps, to segue to the audiobook production. So you mentioned earlier it started as the illustrated book, and it's now being presented as this, yeah, audio drama, like an old-timey radio show almost. It reminded me of that sort of peak BBC era of like the adaptations of, great literature for audiobooks. Um, when
What a great compliment.
Oh, very welcome. When you were returning to the text for this adaptation, was there any revision or rewriting? Was there any like adaptation that had to go into the bits of the story itself?
I if I had rewritten it, I never would have been able to finish it. I mean, as I'm directing the actors to say the dialogue, I'm correcting myself in my head because I wrote this book quite some time ago. And I'm such a better writer now than I was then. And I still like it, but if I was to go through and edit this whole thing, many edits would be made and the job would never be finished. So I had to like look at stuff and go, okay, that is what it is. It's a published book already. You're not allowed to change it. Like I had to refrain from making any edits. What was interesting, the edits that I did make were sometimes when a character is speaking, it would be like the way I made the script was just to take the exact book and just have the narration be for the narrator and have the dialogue be for I didn't change anything. And then I realized I did need to change some of the stuff because it'll be like blah 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 she said, and then the narrator has to say she said, and then blah blah blah. And then sometimes you did have to make a few adjustments to make the character's voice kind of go smoothly. But I would work with the characters in the studio, with the actors in the studio. So we'd do it, and then I go, you know what? I'm just going to slightly rewrite that little piece of dialogue so that it flows better or whatever. And then we'd do it a few times, you know.
Nice. Yeah, let's talk about that cast and the recording process because it really is there are many voices. There are so many vivid characters brought to life through these performances. What was your casting process like? Yeah, your recording process. You were in a studio, you said. How did that all work?
Well, I am hooked up with a lot of creative people. my partner is a musician, and we know sound engineers, and we know people with acting experience and stuff like that. So I didn't really advertise. I just used people that I know.
Hmm.
And when people started reading the book, they started clamoring for the job because the monkey in particular was very competitive because everybody had an idea about how they wanted to do the talking monkey. And I ended up choosing my friend Chris, who's from Rhode Island, and he did this very specific accent for the monkey that is from the town in Rhode Island where he's from. And I was like, yes, that's my monkey right there, you know. So I just the casting was just people that I know. And working with them in the studio, that was a revelation for me because I have a lot of acting training and experience. I don't have any training as a director, but I'm bossy, so that's enough. And and I'd get them in the studio, and then I'd be especially when I worked with the children who don't have any acting training, I would just have to tell them like, okay, think about this is the situation you're in. So you're going to be either panicking, or you're going to be sad, or you're going to be feeling the complex emotions about this or that. And you barely had to say anything. Children are brilliant. I mean, they could pick that up and get all the nuance in their voice like instantly. It was amazing. So and adults are a lot harder, you know. It feels like adults have sort of had a lot of working with people, made me sort of realize a lot of adults have sort of had nuance trained out of their voice. Like they kind of are used to not emoting as much as they could. And you have to tell them like, hey, like this, some people when they talk, they always bring it down. At the end of every sentence, they go, and some people at the end of every sentence, they go up because they're not really sure if they're like making you happy or not. So you've got your people pleasers who go up, and then you've got your kind of, I don't know, this other kind of person that goes down. And I had to train that out of people's voices so that they would stop being themselves and be the character. But for the most part, I let them put their selves into the character, their personality.
Hmm. How many roles did you play yourself? Because you were also in there, right, too?
I haven't counted them, but I'm the narrator, and I am the Duchess, and I am Tammy, her personal chef, and I am the dog, and I am Shaduda, the sorcerer, and I am Francine, the one of the many talking insects. And then I'm a lot of like really small parts. I do a lot of characters. Basically, I ran out of men. It was a lot easier to find female volunteers to work on this than men. And then at one point, I just had completely run out of men. Oh, and I did Jimothy Shrank, which is a man. And so I had to like develop this whole technique for like sort of putting my body into a certain position so that I could sound as much like Jimothy as I possibly could. And I had sort of a kind of a loose-lipped kind of tone to his voice. I tried to do it pretty consistently. It was like that was difficult. But
Wow,
yeah, I don't know how many, probably 10 or 15.
that's incredible. So two follow-ups to that. Was there a character whose voice and physicality, as you just demonstrated, came to you the most easily? And was there one that was the most challenging?
Oh, yes. The Duchess was the most easy because she is based on Mrs. Howell from Gilligan's Island,
Oh,
you
yes.
know. And so she's very aristocratic, but she has sort of a very breathy and sort of very, very deep and very, very serious demeanor. But you know, she knows it all. She's got it all figured out. And she has a sort of old Hollywood accent, you know, like they do. And so I really enjoyed doing the Duchess. And then Tammy was modeled after a bad imitation of Fran Drescher as the nanny. So she's like, what are you, stupid or something? I mean, come on here. You know, and so that was also really fun to do. The ones that were difficult were the magician Shaduda. I nearly broke myself doing that because what I wanted was to find somebody who had a real like whiskey and cigarettes kind of voice, but I didn't know anybody who could do it. So I made it up, and I would hurt myself every time I tried to do this voice. Um, So I'm glad that part of it's over with. I'm not going to imitate that one for you because it
Yeah.
hurt. Um, yeah, so that was my process with that.
Cool. Yeah, I really like that that method reminds me a lot of like when you hear Hank Azaria interviewed about doing The Simpsons, like all of his voices on that are like usually a celebrity or somebody who he has chosen and then he just like tweaks a little bit, to
Yeah,
make it its
right.
own thing. And I love that. Could you talk a little bit about the other bits of the production around the voices, the music, the Foley? I'm so interested in like how the all the other sounds are produced. I loved the song that introduces every chapter. It's a
Oh,
really
thank
nice
you.
little palette cleanser in between
Oh,
chapters.
thank you. I've had like a lot of things. I've had a variety of opinions on that. Some people are like too much song, and some people love it. And I said, okay, well, love it or hate it, whatever it is, what it is. That was created by John O'Manson and his daughter Natanya Manson, who plays the first the first Elizabeth Ann. Halfway through, I have to switch because she just became too busy. Children are very busy people. And she was just too busy to finish it. It's such a long book. I mean, God bless her for doing what she did. So she did that half, and then I had Dorothy redo the second half. And they're both 10 to 11 years old, and their voices weren't too difficult. So I just figured nobody would even notice. And nobody has ever mentioned it to me that they even noticed that
I
the
had no clue. Yeah.
yeah. So that was done by John Manson, who's a brilliant musician. And then a lot of the other work was done by my partner Mitch Reed, who is a multi-instrumentalist. And so he was able to compose a lot of original stuff. And then there was a sound engineer involved. It's this book was, in order to answer that question, I have to tell you something strange, which is this book was sort of like plagued by weird tragedy. It took 2 years to make it because there's so many people involved and stuff. And I had one actor. Originally, I wasn't going to be the narrator. I had like a real professional actress whose voice sounds better than mine to be the narrator, and she ended up needing to get open heart surgery. And bless her heart, she was like, "I'm not going to quit." And I said, "No, you are going to quit. Open heart surgery trumps audiobook making."
Yeah.
Let's be realistic here. And then my sound engineer died. And so Mitch took over and we had my original sound, and then we had another sound engineer who was able to bring in all the sound effects and Foley. There's so many sound effects you can get nowadays for very inexpensively. And so a lot of those are just bought from sound effects people that sell sound effects. That's sort of the sound engineers department. And so the music was a combination of stuff that was licensed and stuff that was composed specifically for the book.
Hmm. It really does, it sounds like it was a real labor of love and of a sort of opportunity for the coming together of an artistic community. There is this nice sort of let's put on a show energy that you get in sort of like the old Hollywood musicals. I really like the community feel to it. This has been so delightful. Is this something that you think you'll do again? This is sort of my general wrapping question where I'm like, what's next for you? What is on your horizon? Are you writing and do you think you'll record again?
Yeah, I mean, I really believe in audiobooks and podcasts. The book is also out as a podcast. You can get it for free on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify or wherever you get podcasts. You can get it for free. And you can also buy it as an audiobook if you don't want to deal with like all the ads and stuff that are on podcasts. But yes, I did what I usually do with any new endeavor. I made every mistake you can possibly make. And now I know how to do it right. And I know all the mistakes that can possibly happen. And I'm really eager to do it again. I have a business as a ghostwriter where I write books for other people. And I'm adding a kind of branch to the business where I produce dramatized full cast audiobooks for other fiction writers. Because I've had so many other writers say, wow, this is a great way. I mean, authors, if they're smart, they don't aspire to become a millionaire on their book. What they want is they want people to read it. They want to get it out there and get as many people to appreciate it as possible. That's the best way for you to get any type of success. And when you go to audiobook or to fiction podcast form, you can reach people, like you said, commuters who listen while they're driving, people who listen while they're washing dishes. I'm a carpenter. I listen while I'm working in the wood shop. Like there's just so many more opportunities to listen to a book than to read, especially nowadays, people just reading less and less. So I'm very excited about the audiobook format also because writers, you essentially have to sell things digitally nowadays. If you're selling things on dead trees, that's just starting to become a thing of the past. People go to ebook. Ebook is fine, but audiobook is also a digital presentation and you get so much more out of it. So I'm really charged up about audiobooks and fiction podcasts. And I'm really excited to do the next one. I have a whole list of books on the list of things that are going to get done.
Nice. Well, I'm very excited to hear the next one. And yeah, I think it's an extremely exciting format. I think that it is like, at once it's like the sort of next step forward in terms of technology and engagement, but it's also a return to the roots of storytelling, to be listening to stories throughout your day, like integrated throughout your life and not just in these closed off little, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been so lovely, and I really appreciate you sharing the book with me and coming to tell our listeners about it.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're
It's been
welcome.
a pleasure.
Thanks. Listeners, so it's your turn now. Please check out Bits of String Too Small to Save. It's a really beautiful listening experience. I think you will love it, and it's available in all the places that Ruby has mentioned. Go to your favorite website, your favorite streaming platform, wherever you like to go for those things. Yes?
Also, just go to bitsofstringtoosmalltosave.com. That's
Yeah.
my webpage, and then it'll take you to all the places where you can buy it or get it for free as a podcast.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'll drop that in the show notes as well. So, all right. Thank you so much for joining us again. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.